Marcus Cole swung a champagne bottle into the skull of a man twice his size. The crack echoed through the restaurant like a gunshot. Crystals shattered. Blood sprayed across white linen tablecloths. 5 armed professionals had stormed the ivory room to kidnap the most powerful woman in tech. And the only thing standing between them and a billion-dollar hostage was a waiter in a stained apron. A man who hadn't thrown a punch in 7 years. A single father who needed to stay alive long enough to pick up his daughter from a neighbor's apartment by midnight. But here's what nobody in that room understood yet. Marcus Cole wasn't just a waiter. He was the deadliest man the United States government ever created. And they erased him for a reason. Before we begin, drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. And if this is your first time here, hit subscribe and ring that bell, because this story is just getting started. The phone rang at 4:47 a.m., and Marcus Cole was already awake. He hadn't slept through the night in 7 years. Not since Somalia. Not since the screaming stopped, and the silence that replaced it became worse than any sound he'd ever heard. His body still operated on combat time. 4 hours of shallow rest, then up before the world had a chance to catch him off guard. He silenced the alarm before it could wake Zoe. The apartment was small, 2 rooms in a building that should have been condemned in the Clinton administration. The pipes groaned when you ran the water. The radiator clanked like a prisoner dragging chains. But it was theirs. Marcus padded barefoot into the kitchen, opened the fridge. Bread, peanut butter, 1 apple, a carton of milk with 2 days left before it turned. He pulled out the bread and started making Zoe's lunch for school. Peanut butter and jelly, cut diagonal, because she'd told him once that triangles taste better than rectangles, and he'd never cut a sandwich any other way since. He worked in the dark. His hands didn't need light. These same hands had assembled a rifle blindfolded in under 40 seconds, had disarmed bombs in pitch-black tunnels beneath Mogadishu, had held his dying best friend's head in his lap, while helicopters that were never coming failed to appear on the horizon. Now they spread peanut butter on white bread for a 7-year-old girl. And that, Marcus had decided, was a better use. "Daddy?" He turned. Zoe stood in the doorway, her afro puffs lopsided from sleep, clutching a stuffed bear named Captain. She was small for 7, with her mother's wide brown eyes and her father's stubborn jaw. "Hey, baby girl, you're up early." "I had the dream again." Marcus set the knife down. He crouched to her level, which was something his 6'2" frame required real effort to do. "The one with the loud noises?" She nodded. "Come here." She walked into his arms, and he held her. She smelled like cocoa butter and the lavender detergent he bought because it was the same one her mother used to use. Before the cancer. Before everything. "Dreams can't hurt you, Zoe. You know why?" "Because you won't let them?" He smiled. "Because you won't let them. You're the toughest person I know." She pulled back and gave him a look that was far too skeptical for a 7-year-old. "Tougher than you?" "Way tougher. Not even close." She giggled. The sound filled the dark kitchen like sunlight, and for a moment, the ghosts in Marcus Cole's head went quiet. He dropped Zoe at school by 7:30, watched her walk through the front doors, waited until she turned and waved. She always turned and waved, then headed to the subway. The commute from their corner of Queens to Midtown Manhattan was 52 minutes on a good day. Marcus used the time the way he always did. Head down, earbuds in, eyes open. Old habits. On the train, he cataloged every passenger within 15 feet. The businessman with a briefcase. Left-handed, no threat. The teenager with the oversized headphones. Oblivious, no threat. The woman clutching her purse tighter when Marcus sat down across from her. He noticed that. He always noticed that. Marcus Cole was 6'2", 220 pounds of lean muscle that even a baggy waiter's uniform couldn't fully hide. His skin was dark, his head was shaved clean, and he had a scar on his left forearm that he told people came from a kitchen accident. It didn't come from a kitchen accident. It came from a knife fight in an alley in Mombasa. He arrived at the Ivory Room by 9 for the morning prep meeting. The restaurant occupied the ground floor of a glass tower on East 57th Street. It was the kind of place where a single entree cost more than Marcus made in his shift, where the wine list was thicker than a phone book, and where the clientele treated the staff like furniture that could take drink orders. "Cole, you're on Section 1 tonight." That was Jeffrey, the maitre d', a thin man with a French accent that Marcus was 90% sure was fake. Jeffrey ran the front of house like a general commanding troops, except his troops carried bread baskets instead of rifles. "Section 1, Marcus repeated. "That's the VIP corner." "Indeed, we have a very important reservation tonight. Victoria Ashford." A murmur rippled through the staff. Marcus didn't react, but he knew the name. Everyone in America knew the name. Victoria Ashford was the CEO of Nexus Technologies, one of the 5 richest women on the planet, and a regular fixture on cable news, either being praised as a visionary or crucified as a monopolist, depending on which channel you watched. "She requires absolute discretion," Jeffrey continued, his fake accent thickening. "Her security team has already done a walkthrough. 3 personal bodyguards, led by a Mr. Whitfield. They've approved the table placement, the exit routes, everything. Our job is to be invisible, serve flawlessly, and stay out of their way." Marcus nodded. Invisible was his specialty. He called Mrs. Patterson at 4 o'clock from the staff break room. Mrs. Patterson was 71 years old, lived 2 doors down, and watched Zoe on the nights Marcus worked late. She was the closest thing to family they had in the city. "She's fine, Marcus. We're doing her homework right now. She's got a math test tomorrow." "She eat dinner?" "Mac and cheese, and before you ask, yes, I put broccoli in it." "Thank you, Mrs. Patterson. I'll be done by 11, midnight at the latest." "Take your time, honey. She's already in her pajamas." He hung up and stared at the phone for a moment. The lock screen was a photo of Zoe at Coney Island last summer, her face smeared with cotton candy, laughing so hard her eyes were closed. It was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. Every night he left for work, he looked at that photo. It was his reason, his anchor, the thing that kept the darkness in his past from pulling him under. He put the phone in his locker, tied his apron, and went to work. Victoria Ashford arrived at exactly 8 o'clock, and she arrived the way powerful people always arrive, like the room had been waiting for her. 3 men entered first. 2 were big, the kind of big that came from years of gym work and government training. They wore suits that were tailored well, but not well enough to completely hide what they carried underneath. The 3rd man was different, leaner, older, eyes like a hawk circling a field. This was James Whitfield, head of Ashford's personal security detail. Marcus recognized the type immediately. Ex-military, probably Secret Service before going private. Good at his job, confident in his ability, and absolutely certain that he was the most dangerous person in any room he entered. Marcus had known men like that. Most of them were dead now. Then Victoria herself walked in. She was tall, mid-40s, wearing a black dress that probably cost more than Marcus's rent for a year. Her hair was pulled back tight, her posture was flawless, and her face carried the expression of someone who had been in complete control of every situation for so long that she'd forgotten what it felt like not to be. Jeffrey practically floated across the room to greet her. "Ms. Ashford, welcome back to the Ivory Room. Your table is ready. Marcus will be serving you this evening." Victoria didn't acknowledge the introduction. She didn't look at Marcus. She walked past him like he was part of the wall. Marcus led them to Section 1, a corner booth with a panoramic view of the dining room and a discreet service exit to the back alley. Whitfield had obviously chosen it. Good sightlines, multiple escape routes, textbook. "Good evening, Ms. Ashford," Marcus said, setting down the leather-bound menu. "Can I start you with sparkling water, San Pellegrino, and tell the chef I want the tasting menu, but I'm allergic to shellfish. If there's even a trace of shrimp in anything, I'll have this restaurant shut down by Friday." She didn't look up from her phone. "Yes, ma'am." "And waiter," she finally glanced at him. Her eyes flicked over him the way you'd scan a vending machine. "Don't hover. I can't stand hovering." "Understood." He turned and walked away. He'd been dismissed by experts. This didn't even register. But something else did. It started small. A feeling Marcus hadn't felt in years, a tightening at the base of his skull, a low hum in his nervous system. His old instructors at Fort Bragg had called it the ping, the subconscious recognition that something in the environment had shifted from safe to dangerous. The first man came in alone, dark suit, well-fitted. He took a seat at the bar and ordered a beer, stared at the TV above the bottles. Normal enough. Except Marcus noticed his eyes weren't tracking the game. They were tracking the room, using the mirror behind the bar. Marcus refilled a water glass at table 4 and kept watching. 2 more men entered together, laughing, shaking hands. Old friends meeting for dinner. They were seated at a table near the center of the room. They ordered a bottle of wine and opened their menus. But Marcus saw it. Their eyes, cold and systematic, sweeping the room in practiced arcs, while their mouths performed the theater of casual conversation. Then the last 2 came in. They took a table near the kitchen entrance. And that's when Marcus felt the hair on the back of his neck stand straight up. The kitchen entrance was a choke point. It controlled access to the back of the house, the service exit, and the most direct route to Ashford's table. You didn't sit near a kitchen entrance because you wanted to. You sat there because you needed to control it. 5 men. Staggered entry. Strategic positioning. No one checking phones. No one actually eating or drinking. Feet flat on the floor, weight forward, ready to move. Marcus had seen this formation before. Not in a restaurant. In a village outside Mogadishu, 3 hours before his entire unit was ambushed. Box-in maneuver. Classic 5-point containment. 1 at the bar covering the main entrance. 2 in the center with eyes on the target. 2 at the kitchen controlling the secondary exit. The target was Victoria Ashford, and she was sitting 15 feet from Marcus, with no idea she'd just been surrounded. His hands kept moving, clearing plates, pouring water, adjusting silverware, but his mind was running calculations, distance, angles, weapons. He cataloged the restaurant the way he'd been trained to catalog a battlefield. Fire extinguisher by the main door, 12 feet. Steak knives on the butcher block in the kitchen, 20 feet through the swinging doors. Boiling water at the pasta station, heavy cast iron pans on the rack. CO2 canisters for the soda fountain. A champagne bottle in the ice bucket at table 3. Everything was a weapon. Everything was a variable. He had to warn somebody. Marcus moved toward the bar, carrying an empty tray. He positioned himself near Whitfield, who was standing with his back against the wall, arms crossed, scanning the room with the lazy confidence of a man who believed he'd already identified every possible threat. "Sir," Marcus said, keeping his voice low, "I need you to listen to me." Whitfield's eyes cut to him, sharp, annoyed. What? Your client is in danger. 5 men entered separately over the last 10 minutes. They're working together. 2 at the center table, 1 at the bar, 2 by the kitchen. They've boxed you in. Whitfield stared at him for a long moment. Then something shifted in his face. Not alarm. Amusement. The corner of his mouth twitched upward. I'm sorry. What exactly qualifies a waiter to assess tactical threats? I'm telling you what I see. Whitfield leaned in slightly. Let me tell you what I see. I see 5 wealthy men having dinner in a restaurant where the cheapest steak costs $300. I see a busboy who's watched too many action movies. And I see my client's dinner being interrupted. Marcus felt the old anger, the familiar rage that came from being dismissed, being looked through, being reduced to something less than what he was. But he kept his voice steady. The man at the bar is using the mirror to maintain eyes on your principal. The 2 by the kitchen are blocking your exit route. Check their hands. They haven't touched their menus. Check their feet. Flat on the floor, weight forward. They're ready to move. Whitfield's jaw tightened. I've been doing this for 15 years, pal. I've protected senators, ambassadors, and 3 Fortune 500 CEOs. I don't need tactical analysis from a man carrying a breadbasket. Then you're going to get her killed. The words hung in the air between them. Whitfield's eyes hardened. He straightened up, and for a moment Marcus thought the man might actually listen. But then the professional pride won. The inability to accept intelligence from someone he'd already classified as beneath him. Walk away, Whitfield said, his voice dropping to ice. Right now, before I have you fired. Marcus didn't move. You're making a mistake. The only mistake I see is you still standing here. Back off. Marcus looked at him for one more second. He saw it clearly. The rigid certainty. The wall of ego that no amount of evidence would breach. He'd seen that wall before, too. On the face of the intelligence officer who'd assured his unit that the route through the village was clear, that there were no hostiles, that everything had been accounted for. 6 men died that night because of a wall just like this one. Marcus turned and walked away. He stood behind the service station, his hands gripping the edge of the counter. His pulse was elevated. His breathing was controlled. The restaurant hummed around him, glasses clinking, low conversation, the soft string quartet playing something by Debussy. He could leave, right now, walk into the kitchen, out the back door, and disappear into the city. Be at Mrs. Patterson's door in 45 minutes. Hold Zoe while she slept. This wasn't his fight. He had no obligation to Victoria Ashford or anyone in this room. He was done with that life. He had made a promise. The promise had a name. It was a small name, written in crayon on a card taped to his locker. I love you, Daddy, from Zoe. But then his eyes drifted across the room. Table 5, a young mother with a little girl about Zoe's age. The kid coloring on a placemat while her mom sipped wine. Table 8, an elderly couple holding hands across the table, their wedding rings dull with decades of wear. Table 12, a group of friends celebrating something, their laughter bright and careless. None of them knew. None of them could see what Marcus saw. They were all sitting in the kill zone of 5 professional operators. And when those men made their move, there would be chaos. Gunfire in a crowded room, panicked stampedes, crossfire. The little girl at table 5 was coloring a picture of a butterfly. Marcus closed his eyes. He saw Zoe. He saw the butterfly. He saw the village outside Mogadishu, the bodies in the dust, the faces of men he couldn't save because he'd been too late. He opened his eyes. He wasn't going to be too late again. He reached under the service station and pulled out his phone. Dialed 911. When the operator answered, he spoke in a low, clear voice. Armed hostage situation developing at the Ivory Room restaurant, East 57th Street. 5 armed men, tactical formation. They haven't moved yet, but they will within minutes. Multiple civilians in the building. Send everything you have. He hung up before the operator could ask questions. Response time in Midtown on a Tuesday night, 8 to 12 minutes. That was a lifetime. He put the phone away. He looked across the room at the man sitting at the bar, the one watching everything in the mirror. As Marcus watched, the man raised his beer and nodded. A tiny gesture, almost invisible. The signal. The leader at the center table touched his ear. An earpiece. Communications. Coordinated. The 2 men by the kitchen straightened in their seats. Hands disappeared below the table. Marcus untied his apron, folded it neatly, set it on the counter. The waiter was gone. What remained was something else entirely. Something the United States Army had spent 4 years and $12 million creating. Something that had operated in the darkest corners of the world under a designation that existed in no official record. Unit Wraith. Marcus Cole rolled his shoulders, felt the old machinery click into place behind his eyes, and began to move. The man at the bar moved first. He slid off his stool with the fluid ease of someone who had rehearsed the motion 100 times. His right hand disappeared inside his jacket and came back holding a thin, silver blade. Not a knife you'd buy in a store, but something custom, balanced for throwing. He crossed the 6 feet between himself and the bodyguard stationed near the entrance in less than 2 seconds. The bodyguard, a big man, ex-Secret Service, the kind of guy who could bench press 300 pounds, never even turned around. The blade entered the soft tissue just below his right ear. His knees buckled. He grabbed at the bar for support, missed, and went down hard. A woman at a nearby table saw him fall and screamed. That scream was the match that lit the room on fire. Everything happened at once. The 2 men at the center table exploded from their seats. They moved like water. No wasted motion, no hesitation. One pulled a compact stun gun and closed on the second bodyguard at the bar. The voltage hit the big man in the chest, and he went rigid, every muscle locking, then collapsed sideways off his stool, twitching on the floor. The other went straight for Whitfield. Marcus watched it from across the room, and even he had to admire the precision. The attacker didn't use a gun. He used an extendable steel baton, 21 inches of hardened alloy that snapped to full length with a flick of the wrist. Whitfield was fast. He got his hands up, blocked the first strike, threw a solid right cross that would have dropped most men. But his attacker slipped it, ducked low, and brought the baton across Whitfield's knee with a crack that made Marcus wince from 40 feet away. Whitfield screamed. His leg folded. He reached for the weapon under his jacket, but the second strike caught his wrist, and his fingers went dead. The gun skittered across the hardwood floor and disappeared under a table. 10 seconds. Maybe 12. 3 professional bodyguards. Neutralized. The 2 men by the kitchen were already on their feet, pulling suppressed pistols from inside their jackets. One of them fired a single round into the ceiling. The sound was soft, a muted cough, but the effect was absolute. Every person in the restaurant froze. "Nobody move." The man's voice was calm, almost bored. "Hands where we can see them. On the floor. Now. This is not about you. Do what we say, and you walk out of here tonight." Panic rippled through the room. Chairs scraped. A wine glass shattered. People dropped to the floor, some crying, some too shocked to make a sound. The young mother at table 5 grabbed her daughter and pulled her under the table, pressing the girl's face against her chest to muffle her whimpers. Marcus saw it all. He processed it the way his training had wired him to process it. Not as chaos, but as data. Two gunmen controlling the crowd. One near the main entrance wiping the blade clean. One standing over Whitfield. And the fifth man, the leader, walking toward Victoria Ashford's booth with the unhurried confidence of someone who had already won. Marcus had been moving since the first man left his bar stool. Not running, not charging. Drifting. The way he'd been trained to move through hostile environments. Using the panicking crowd as cover. Staying low, staying quiet. Closing the distance between himself and the nearest weapon he could reach. The champagne bottle and the ice bucket at table 3. He reached it just as the leader arrived at Victoria's booth. The leader was tall, maybe 6'1", with pale eyes that looked almost colorless under the restaurant's warm lighting. His hair was cropped close, military style, and a thin scar ran from his left temple to the corner of his mouth. When he spoke, his accent was faint, Eastern European, Russian maybe, carefully smoothed by years of operating in Western countries. Ms. Ashford. He said her name like he was tasting it. My name is not important. What is important is that you stand up, walk with me to the door, and get into the vehicle waiting outside. If you do this quietly, no one else in this room gets hurt. Victoria hadn't moved from the booth. Her face was white, the blood drained from it like someone had pulled a plug. But Marcus noticed something. Her hands weren't shaking. They were gripping the edge of the table so hard her knuckles had gone pale. But they were steady. She was terrified, but she was holding. "Do you know who I am?" Victoria said. Her voice cracked on the last word, but she pushed through it. "Do you have any idea what will happen to you?" The leader smiled. It was the emptiest smile Marcus had ever seen. "I know exactly who you are, Ms. Ashford. You are the woman who is going to give me what I want. Now stand up." "I'm not going anywhere with you." The leader's smile disappeared. He reached down and grabbed her arm, hauling her up from the booth with one hand. Victoria gasped, not a scream, but a sharp intake of breath, the sound of someone who refused to give her enemy the satisfaction. "I said, stand up." Marcus was 12 feet away. He had the champagne bottle in his right hand, a full bottle of Veuve Clicquot, heavy as a club. His fingers were wrapped around the neck, his grip automatic, the muscle memory of 1,000 combat drills guiding his hand. He didn't think. Thinking was too slow. Thinking got people killed. He moved. "Hey!" One word, spoken loud enough to cut through the silence. Not shouted, projected, the way a drill sergeant projects across a parade ground. Every head in the room turned toward him. The leader turned too, his pale eyes narrowing, his hand still clamped on Victoria's arm. He saw the waiter, the tall black man in the white shirt and dark pants, standing in the middle of the dining room, holding a bottle of champagne. For 1 second, maybe less, confusion flickered across the leader's face. The waiter? What was the waiter doing? That second was all Marcus needed. He closed the distance in 3 strides and swung the bottle in a tight, vicious arc, aimed at the leader's temple. It wasn't a wild swing. It was a precisely calibrated strike, hips rotating, shoulder driving through, every pound of his 220 frame channeled into the point of impact. The leader was fast, faster than Marcus expected. He jerked his head back, and the bottle caught him across the jaw instead of the temple. Glass exploded. Champagne and shards sprayed across Victoria's booth. The leader staggered backward, releasing Victoria, a sound between a roar and a gurgle tearing from his throat as his jaw dislocated. Victoria fell back against the booth, stunned. Marcus didn't look at her. He was already turning, because the bottle had bought him 3 seconds at most. And in 3 seconds, 4 men with weapons were going to converge on his position. The man with the baton reached him first. He came in fast, swinging the steel rod in a horizontal strike aimed at Marcus's head. Marcus had sparred against baton fighters in 3 different countries. The weapon was devastating at range, but up close, it became a liability. He stepped inside the arc of the swing, so close he could smell the man's cologne, and caught the weapon arm at the wrist. In the same motion, his right elbow drove upward into the man's chin. The impact was savage. Marcus felt the jawbone shift under the blow, felt teeth crack. The man's eyes rolled back and his body went slack. But Marcus didn't release him. He twisted the limp arm, spinning the unconscious body around so it faced the 2 gunmen across the room. The suppressed shots came immediately. 2 soft pops that punched into the human shield's back. The body jerked. Marcus let it fall and dove behind the nearest overturned table. He was breathing hard now, not from exertion, from the chemical cocktail flooding his bloodstream. Adrenaline, cortisol, norepinephrine. His body was doing what it had been conditioned to do, dumping every combat hormone it had into his system, sharpening his vision, slowing his perception of time, narrowing his world to a tumult of threat and response. He was behind the bar before the gunmen could reacquire their target. Leo, the young bartender, was crouched on the floor, hugging his knees, tears streaming down his face. "Kid," Marcus said, "look at me." Leo looked up, eyes wild. "Did you call 911? I can't. My hands." Marcus took the phone from Leo's trembling fingers, confirmed the line was already open from his earlier call, and slid it back. "Don't move. Don't stand up. You're going to be fine." He was already scanning the bar, bottles, ice, cocktail shakers, a long steel bar spoon, a heavy glass pitcher. The items arranged themselves in his mind not as bar equipment, but as ordnance, projectiles, distractions, impact weapons. The first gunman came around the right side of the bar, pistol up, moving in a tactical crouch. Disciplined, professional. Marcus grabbed a cocktail shaker full of ice and hurled the contents into the man's face. Ice and liquid hit his eyes like shrapnel. The gunman flinched, one hand coming up reflexively to shield his face, his aim shifting off target for exactly 1 second. Marcus seized the bar spoon and drove it forward like a spear. The pointed end buried itself in the soft hollow of the man's throat, just above the collarbone. Not deep enough to kill, deep enough to end the fight. The man made a sound like a drain unclogging and went down, both hands clutching his neck, the pistol clattering to the floor. Marcus scooped up the gun, checked the magazine. 7 rounds. Chambered one. Suppressor attached. The weight of it in his hands felt like coming home, and that feeling disgusted him. The stun gun operator was circling from the left, trying to flank. Marcus met him at the end of the bar. The man jabbed the stun gun forward, 2 metal prongs crackling with voltage. Marcus sidestepped, caught the man's extended arm, and used his momentum to slam him face first into the marble bar top. The crack was loud enough to make Leo yelp. The man slid to the floor and didn't move. 4 down, 1 left. Marcus stepped out from behind the bar, the suppressed pistol held low in a 2-handed grip, his stance balanced, his breathing controlled. The dining room was a wreck. Overturned tables, broken glass, spilled wine spreading across the hardwood like dark blood. Patrons were flattened on the floor, some sobbing, some silent with shock. And in the middle of it all stood the leader, Viktor Reznikov, though Marcus didn't know his name yet. The man had pulled Victoria from the booth and was holding her against his chest, one arm locked around her throat. In his free hand, he gripped a jagged shard of the broken champagne bottle, its edge pressed against the side of Victoria's neck. A thin line of blood was already trickling down her skin. "Drop the weapon," Victor said. His words were mangled by his dislocated jaw, slurred and wet, but the threat was clear. "Drop it, or I open her throat." Marcus stopped. 15 feet away, the pistol aimed at the space between Victor's eyes. His hands were rock steady, not a tremor, not a twitch. Victoria's eyes found his. She was breathing in short, shallow gasps, her body rigid against her captor. But her eyes were doing something Marcus didn't expect. They weren't begging. They weren't pleading for him to save her. They were studying him. Even now, even with a shard of glass at her jugular, Victoria Ashford was trying to figure him out. "You won't shoot," Victor said, tightening his grip on Victoria's throat. She winced. "You shoot me, my hand slips. She bleeds out in 90 seconds. You lose your precious billionaire." Marcus didn't respond. He shifted his weight slightly to the left. Then again. Small movements, inches, changing the angle between the muzzle and the target. "I'll tell you what's going to happen," Victor continued, dragging Victoria backward toward the door. "I'm going to walk out of here with her. You're going to stand there and watch. And maybe, if your government pays what we ask, she comes back alive." "You made 3 mistakes," Marcus said. Victor stopped moving. Something in Marcus's voice, the absolute calm of it, the flatness, like a man reading the weather, made him pause. "Your first mistake was assuming the bodyguards were the only threat in this room." Victor's pale eyes narrowed. "Your second mistake was looking at me and seeing a waiter." "And the third?" Victor snarled, pressing the glass harder against Victoria's neck. She gasped. Marcus tilted his head slightly. His voice dropped to something barely above a whisper. "You're holding her with your right hand. Your dominant hand is occupied. Your balance is shifted to your back foot. And you're standing 6 inches to the left of where you need to be to use her as full cover." Victor's eyes widened. He understood, in that fraction of a second, that the man in front of him was not a waiter, was not a civilian, was not anything he had planned for. Marcus fired. The bullet entered Victor's right shoulder, the shoulder of the arm holding the glass. The round shattered the clavicle and severed the tendons controlling his grip. His fingers spasmed open. The glass shard fell. His arm dropped away from Victoria's throat like a puppet with its strings cut. Victoria threw herself forward, stumbling, falling to her hands and knees on the glass-strewn floor. Marcus was already moving. He crossed the 15 feet in 4 strides, reversed the pistol in his hand, and brought the heavy steel butt down on Victor's already broken jaw. Viktor Reznikov collapsed like a building being demolished floor by floor. Knees first, then hips, then shoulders, then skull hitting hardwood. He didn't get up. Silence. The string quartet had stopped playing long ago. The only sounds in the ivory room were the quiet sobs of frightened diners and the distant, growing wail of sirens. Marcus stood over the last man, the pistol at his side, his chest rising and falling in slow, measured breaths. He looked down at his hands, the hands that made peanut butter sandwiches, the hands that braided his daughter's hair. They were streaked with blood and champagne, and they were perfectly still. He heard movement behind him and turned. Victoria Ashford was pulling herself up, using an overturned chair for support. Her black dress was torn at the shoulder. There was glass in her hair and blood on her neck where the shard had nicked her. Her hands were shaking now, the adrenaline crash hitting her all at once. She stood, unsteady, and looked at Marcus. Really looked at him. Not the way she'd looked at him when he took her drink order, like he was part of the furniture. She looked at him the way you look at something you can't explain, something that has fundamentally altered your understanding of the world. "Who are you?" she whispered. Marcus held her gaze for a moment. Then he set the pistol on the nearest table, carefully, muzzle pointed away from everyone. "I'm the waiter," he said. "Section 1. You ordered the San Pellegrino." He turned away from her and walked toward the service station where he'd left his apron. His phone was in his locker. Mrs. Patterson was watching Zoe. It was 8:47 p.m. If he left now, he could be home by 10. Behind him, the front doors burst open and the first wave of NYPD officers poured into the restaurant, weapons drawn, shouting commands into the chaos. Marcus Cole untied his apron, folded it, and set it on the counter for the last time. The cops didn't let him leave. A uniformed officer grabbed Marcus by the shoulder before he made it 3 steps from the service station. "Sir, I need you to stop right there. Hands where I can see them." Marcus raised his hands slowly, palms out, fingers spread. He knew the drill. Black man in a room full of downed bodies. The next 30 seconds were the most dangerous of the entire night. More dangerous than Victor. More dangerous than any of the 5 men he'd just put on the floor. Because those men had been professionals, operating on logic. A frightened cop with a Glock and a pulse rate north of 160 operated on something else entirely. "I'm unarmed," Marcus said, keeping his voice low and even. "The weapon is on the table behind me. I'm staff. I work here." "On the ground, now!" Marcus went to his knees, then flat on his stomach, hands behind his head, fingers interlaced. The cold hardwood pressed against his cheek. He could see the legs of tables, broken glass, a woman's high heel that had been abandoned in the panic. A knee drove into his back, and hands patted him down roughly. "He's clean. Get him up." They pulled him to his feet and walked him to a chair near the window. He sat. He waited. Around him, the restaurant was transforming from a crime scene into a bureaucracy. Paramedics were working on the downed bodyguards. The man who'd been stabbed in the neck was being loaded onto a stretcher, an EMT pressing gauze against the wound. Whitfield was sitting against the wall, his face gray with pain, his knee swelling to the size of a grapefruit. Victor and his team were being cuffed and carried out one by one. A detective arrived 20 minutes later. He was mid-50s, heavy-set, with a face that looked like it had been carved out of tired. His suit was wrinkled. His tie was loosened. He moved through the chaos with the unhurried patience of a man who had seen too many crime scenes to be impressed by another one. He sat down across from Marcus and opened a small notebook. "Detective Morales, Midtown North. You want to tell me what happened here tonight?" 5 men attacked a customer. I intervened." Morales looked at him. Then he looked around the room at the 5 bodies being processed. Then he looked back at Marcus. "You intervened?" "Yes, sir." "With what?" "Whatever was available." Morales flipped a page in his notebook. "So let me get this straight. A champagne bottle, a cocktail shaker full of ice, a bar spoon, and a stolen firearm. That's what you used to take down 5 armed men." "That's correct. And before tonight, you were a waiter." "I am a waiter." Morales leaned back in his chair. He studied Marcus the way a mechanic studies an engine that's running too smooth, looking for the part that doesn't belong. "Mr. Cole, I've been a cop for 27 years. I've seen bar fights, I've seen domestic disputes, and I've seen a crack addict take on 4 officers with a broken bottle and lose badly. What I have never seen is a restaurant server single-handedly neutralize a 5-man tactical team using improvised weapons and a precision gunshot to a hostage-taker's shoulder." Marcus said nothing. "That shot," Morales continued, tapping his pen against the notebook. 20 feet. Moving target. Hostage in front. You put the round exactly where it needed to go to disable his arm without hitting the woman. You know how many cops on the NYPD could make that shot under those conditions? I can count them on one hand, and none of them are waiters. It was adrenaline. I got lucky. You got lucky. Morales repeated the words like he was tasting something sour. Right. You got lucky 5 separate times, each time in a way that demonstrated advanced hand-to-hand combat training, tactical awareness, and weapons proficiency. That's one hell of a lucky streak, Mr. Cole. Am I being charged with something? Morales closed the notebook. No. By every account in this room, you saved about 40 lives tonight. The woman you protected has already called her lawyers, who are probably calling the mayor as we speak. You're not being charged. But I want you to know that I'm going to pull your background, and I have a feeling what I find isn't going to match what you're telling me. You'll find the social security number, a work history, and a clean record. That's all there is. Morales stood up. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, sliding it across the table. When you're ready to tell me the truth, give me a call. Marcus looked at the card but didn't pick it up. You're free to go, Morales said. Don't leave the city. Marcus stood. His body was starting to register the aftermath. A dull ache in his right elbow from the strike he delivered. A stiffness in his lower back. The cold sweat of adrenaline withdrawal cooling on his skin. He needed to move. He needed to get out of this building, away from the cameras and the cops and the questions. And he needed to hold his daughter. He made it to the front door before a voice stopped him. Wait! He turned. Victoria Ashford was standing near her booth, a shock blanket draped over her shoulders. A paramedic was trying to examine the cut on her neck, but she had pushed his hand away. She was looking at Marcus with an expression he couldn't read, something between gratitude and interrogation. I don't even know your name, she said. Your real name. Marcus Cole. It's on my name tag. She took a step toward him, then another. The paramedic tried to follow her, and she waved him off without looking. She stopped 3 feet from Marcus, close enough that he could see the thin red line on her neck where the glass had cut her, close enough that he could see her eyes were dry. She hadn't cried. Not once. Why? She asked. The question was simple. The weight behind it was not. Why what? Why did you do it? You could have walked away. You could have gotten out through the kitchen. Nobody would have blamed you. Why did you risk your life for a woman who didn't even bother to look at you when you took her drink order? The question landed harder than she probably intended, or maybe exactly as hard as she intended. Marcus was starting to realize that Victoria Ashford didn't do anything by accident. He thought about lying, giving her something clean and noble about duty or conscience. But he was tired, and the adrenaline was gone, and the truth was simpler than any lie he could construct. There was a little girl at table 5, he said. She was coloring a butterfly. She reminded me of my daughter. Victoria blinked. Whatever answer she had expected, it wasn't that. You have a daughter? I have to go pick her up. Good night, Miss Ashford. He turned and walked out into the night. The cold air hit his face, and he breathed it in deep, letting it scour the smell of blood and champagne from his lungs. News vans were already lining up on the street, reporters setting up under portable lights. He put his head down and walked fast, disappearing into the crowd of onlookers before anyone could point a camera at him. He was 6 blocks away before he let himself stop. He ducked into a doorway, leaned against the wall, and pressed his palms against his eyes. His hands were shaking now. Not during, never during, but always after. His body's delayed invoice for the violence it had performed. He pulled out his phone and called Mrs. Patterson. Marcus, are you all right? I saw something on the news about a restaurant. I'm fine. I'm on my way. Is Zoe asleep? She's been out since 9. That math test must have worn her out. Don't wake her. I'll carry her home. He hung up and started walking toward the subway. Behind him, the sirens were still wailing, the lights still flashing. That world, the world of violence and adrenaline and men with weapons, was pulling at him, trying to drag him back. He could feel it like a physical force, like gravity. He walked faster. Zoe was asleep on Mrs. Patterson's couch, her face pressed into a throw pillow. Captain the Bear tucked under her arm. Marcus scooped her up the way he always did. One arm under her knees, one behind her back, her head falling naturally against his shoulder. She weighed 47 pounds. He could have carried her for miles. "Daddy?" she mumbled, not quite awake. "I'm here, baby girl. Go back to sleep." "You smell funny." He probably smelled like champagne and blood and someone else's cologne. "I spilled something at work. I'll shower when we get home." "Okay." She was asleep again before he reached the door. He carried her down the hall, into their apartment, and laid her on her bed. He pulled the blanket up to her chin and sat on the edge of the mattress for a long time, watching her breathe. In, out. In, out. The most important rhythm in his world. Tomorrow, everything would change. He knew that. The police would dig. The cameras in the restaurant would have captured his face. The news cycle would chew through the story and spit out his name. And whoever had sent those 5 men would start asking questions about the waiter who had torn their operation apart. Tomorrow, he would have to run again. Pack the duffel bag, pull Zoe out of school, disappear into another city, another name, another life. But that was tomorrow. Tonight he sat in the dark and watched his daughter sleep and tried not to think about the sound a man's jaw makes when it breaks under your elbow. He was gone by noon the next day. Marcus Cole, as far as anyone could tell, simply evaporated. He packed everything they owned into 2 bags. He pulled the battery from his phone and dropped it in a storm drain. He withdrew the $2,300 from his checking account in cash and closed it. He scrubbed his laptop's hard drive, then smashed it and dumped the pieces in 3 separate trash cans across 2 boroughs. He told Zoe they were going on an adventure. She asked if she could bring Captain. He said of course. They took a bus to Brooklyn, then another bus to a neighborhood where nobody asked questions because everybody had their own. He found a room in a building where the landlord was a heavy-set woman named Dolores, who took 3 months' rent in cash and never asked for a last name. "Just you and the girl?" Dolores asked, counting the bills. "Just us." "Laundry's in the basement. Don't use it after 10. The pipes wake up the building." That was the extent of the interview. Marcus enrolled Zoe in a new school under a slightly altered version of her name. He found a cash job washing dishes at a Dominican restaurant 4 blocks from their apartment. The owner, a man named Hector, paid him $60 a day and didn't file any paperwork. The work was mindless and invisible, which was exactly what Marcus needed. For 2 weeks it held. 2 weeks of anonymity, of routine, of Zoe settling into her new school and coming home with stories about a girl named Priya who shared her crayons. 2 weeks of Marcus starting to believe, again, that he could make the ghost stay dead. But the ghost had already been seen, and the people looking for it had resources that made the NYPD look like a neighborhood watch. Victoria Ashford didn't sleep for 3 days after the attack. She told herself it was the trauma, the adrenaline, the nightmares that jolted her awake at 2 a.m., drenched in sweat. But that wasn't the whole truth. The truth was simpler and more unsettling. She couldn't stop thinking about him. Not in a romantic way, Victoria had long ago excised romance from her life the way a surgeon removes a tumor. It was a distraction she couldn't afford. What consumed her was the question, the impossibility of what she'd witnessed. A waiter, a man who refilled her water glass, had dismantled a professional kill team in under 2 minutes using bar equipment. The precision, the calm, the way he'd stood over the last man with a pistol at his side and his breathing perfectly controlled, like his heart rate hadn't broken 80 the entire time. Who does that? She called Peterson, her new head of security, a dour Scotsman that Whitfield's incapacitation had forced her to promote from the London office. I want everything on Marcus Cole. Everything. Use every resource we have. Ms. Ashford, the police are going to find exactly what he wants them to find. I want what he's hiding. Peterson was good. His team was better. They were the same people who ran counterintelligence for Nexus Technologies, who protected trade secrets worth more than the GDP of some countries. They tore into Marcus Cole's identity the way a surgeon opens a chest cavity, methodically, layer by layer. What they found was almost nothing, and that almost nothing told them everything. His social security number was legitimate, but recently issued. His employment history was a string of cash-in-hand jobs at businesses that had since closed. No college records. No military records. At least, none they could access through normal channels. No credit history before 5 years ago. No social media. No photographs beyond a single blurry DMV shot. It's a legend, Peterson told Victoria during a secure briefing in her penthouse office. A constructed identity, and a very good one. Whoever built this didn't just erase his past. They created a plausible present to take its place. This is government-level work. Which government? Ours. Peterson pulled up a file on the screen. We ran his face through a military database that Nexus has access to through our defense contracts. Got a partial match to a heavily redacted Army Special Operations file. Most of it's blacked out, but what's left is enough. Victoria stared at the screen. The photo showed a younger Marcus, leaner, harder, wearing desert camouflage. His eyes were the same watchful stillness, the same quiet intensity that had pinned her in place when he'd looked at her across the restaurant. Unit Wraith, Peterson read. Solo operator designation. Used for missions requiring complete deniability. These people don't exist in any official sense. They're deployed, they execute, and then they're erased. The designation was terminated 7 years ago following something called Operation Black Lantern. What was Operation Black Lantern? Official story? A training exercise that went wrong. Friendly fire incident in Somalia. An entire team killed. And the unofficial story? Peterson hesitated. The whispers say it was a betrayal. Victoria sat with that for a long moment. They threw him away. They tried to erase him, and he let them, because the alternative was spending the rest of his life as a target. He has a daughter. Peterson looked up from the file. Pardon? He told me he has a daughter. That's why he intervened. There was a little girl in the restaurant who reminded him of his child. Victoria stood and walked to the window. The city spread out below her. Glass and steel and 10 million lives stacked on top of each other. He's not just hiding from his past, Peterson. He's hiding his daughter from it. He's running to keep her safe. If Cerberus identifies him, and they will, because they'll be running the same search as we are, they won't just come after him. They'll use her. The words hung in the air. Victoria turned from the window. Her face had changed. The calculating CEO was gone. In her place was something rawer, something that surprised even Peterson. "Find him," she said, "before they do." It took Peterson's team another week. They tracked a facial recognition hit from a city bus camera in Brooklyn. From there, they cross-referenced transit patterns, neighborhood surveillance footage, and school enrollment records. The trail led to a run-down building in Flatbush. Victoria insisted on going herself. Peterson argued. He threatened to resign. He pointed out, correctly, that she had just survived a kidnapping attempt, and voluntarily walking into an unsecured location was insane. "Then come with me," she said. "But I'm going." They drove to Brooklyn in an armored SUV. Peterson stayed in the vehicle. Victoria walked into the building alone. She found apartment 3A at the end of a hallway and knocked. The door opened on a chain. Marcus's face appeared in the gap. When he saw her, something passed through his eyes. Not surprise exactly, but a weary recognition, like a man who hears a storm he's been expecting finally arrive. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "I know. How did you find me?" "The same way they will. Facial recognition, transit cameras, school records." She watched that last one hit him. School records. Zoe. His jaw tightened and his hand gripped the doorframe so hard the wood creaked. "You put my daughter at risk by coming here." "Your daughter was already at risk. That's why I came." They stared at each other through the 4-inch gap in the door. Behind Marcus, Victoria could hear the faint sound of a television playing a cartoon. A child's voice singing along to the theme song. "The men who attacked me," Victoria said. "They work for a corporation called Cerberus Defense, my biggest competitor. They weren't trying to kill me. They were trying to extract proprietary technology. Project Titan, an AI weapons platform worth more than most countries. By stopping them, you didn't just save me. You disrupted a major operation. Cerberus doesn't forgive that." "That's your problem, not mine." "It became your problem the moment you picked up that champagne bottle. Cerberus will identify you. They have the same technology I used to find you. And when they find you, they won't knock on your door, Marcus. They'll come through the walls." Silence. The cartoon played on. The child sang. "What do you want from me?" Marcus asked. The anger was still there, but underneath it she heard something else. Exhaustion. The bone-deep fatigue of a man who had been running for 7 years and could feel the ground narrowing under his feet. "I want to help you. I have safe houses, security teams, resources that can keep you and your daughter off every grid on the planet. I owe you that." "You don't owe me anything." "You're wrong. And even if you're right, I'm not offering because of debt. I'm offering because they're coming for you, and you know it, and that little girl singing behind you doesn't deserve to pay the price for what you did in my restaurant." Marcus closed his eyes. Behind the door, Zoe laughed at something on the TV. The sound was so pure, so uncontaminated by the darkness pressing in from every direction, that it made his chest ache. He opened his eyes. "I don't trust you." "You don't have to trust me. You just have to trust that I'm the lesser threat." He almost smiled at that. Almost. Then his gaze shifted. A subtle change, his eyes moving past Victoria's shoulder, focusing on something behind her. His pupils dilated. Every muscle in his body went rigid. A red dot had appeared on the wall of the hallway, small and steady, like a firefly frozen in place. It was moving slowly across the peeling paint, drifting toward the open door, toward the gap where Victoria stood. Marcus knew what it was before his conscious mind formed the word. His body was already reacting, 7 years of dormant training igniting in his nervous system, like a match touching gasoline. He grabbed Victoria by the front of her jacket and wrenched her through the doorway with enough force to send them both sprawling across the floor of his apartment. The chain ripped free from the frame. Victoria hit the ground hard, the air driven from her lungs. The window at the end of the hallway exploded inward. The bullet passed through the space where Victoria's head had been a half-second earlier and buried itself in the far wall of Marcus's apartment, sending a spray of plaster across the room. Zoe screamed. Marcus was already up. He threw himself across the room and covered his daughter with his body, pulling her off the couch and onto the floor, shielding her with every inch of himself. A second shot came through the apartment window this time, punching through the glass and embedding in the ceiling above them. "Daddy! Daddy, what's happening?" "Stay down, baby. Stay down. Don't move." His voice was steady. His hands were wrapped around her so tightly, he was afraid he'd hurt her, but he couldn't make himself let go. She was shaking. Her entire small body was trembling against his chest, and the sound of her crying was the worst thing he had ever heard in a life that had been filled with terrible sounds. He looked up. Victoria was on the floor near the door, blood on her hand from where she'd cut it on the broken chain. She was breathing hard, her eyes wide, but she was alert. She met his gaze across the room. "They found you," she said. Marcus looked down at Zoe. Her face was pressed against his shirt, tears soaking through the fabric. Her fingers were clutching Captain the Bear so hard the stuffing was bulging at the seams. He'd spent 7 years building a wall between his daughter and the world that had created him. 7 years of silence, of anonymity, of cutting sandwiches into triangles and reading bedtime stories, and pretending that the man he used to be was dead and buried. The wall had just come down. He lifted Zoe and pressed his forehead against hers. "Baby, I need you to listen to me. Can you do that?" She nodded, her lips trembling. "We're going to leave, right now. You're going to hold on to Daddy, and you're going to close your eyes, and you're not going to let go, okay?" "I'm scared." "I know, but I've got you. I've always got you." He stood, Zoe clinging to his neck, and turned to Victoria. His face had changed. The warmth, the softness, the careful gentleness of the man who made peanut butter sandwiches, all of it had been replaced by something ancient and cold. "You said you have safe houses." Victoria nodded. "Get my daughter to one, now." "What about you?" He reached under the couch and pulled out the duffel bag that was always packed, always ready. He unzipped it with one hand and pulled out something wrapped in oilcloth. He unwrapped it. A Sig Sauer P226. The weapon he'd told himself he would never touch again. "They shot at my daughter," Marcus said. His voice was quiet, quieter than it had been all night, quieter than it had been in 7 years. "That changes everything." Victoria made the call while Marcus held Zoe against his chest with one arm and the Sig Sauer in the other. She spoke fast, her voice clipped and controlled, the CEO taking over where the frightened woman had been seconds earlier. "Peterson, I'm at the Brooklyn location. We've taken fire. Sniper. At least one shooter, elevated position. Probably the building across the street. I need extraction, now. Armored vehicle. Bring a second team to a safe house. Use Protocol 7. She hung up and looked at Marcus. 4 minutes. "We don't have 4 minutes. He was crouched below the window line, his back against the wall, Zoe's face buried in his neck. The girl had stopped screaming, but hadn't stopped shaking. Her breath came in small, hitching gasps against his skin. Marcus's eyes were scanning the apartment, the angles, the exposure, the lines of fire from the broken window. "There's a service stairwell at the end of the hall," he said. "Goes down to the basement. Basement connects to the laundry room. Laundry room has a door to the alley on the south side of the building. That puts the building between us and the shooter's position." "How do you know the shooter's position?" "Bullet trajectory. Both shots came from the northeast. Elevated angle, 4th or 5th floor of the building across the intersection. If we exit south, we're in his blind spot." Victoria stared at him. You calculated all that in the last 30 seconds? I calculated it in the first 2. Let's go. They moved fast. Marcus went first, Zoe clinging to him like a second skin, the cig held low in his right hand. Victoria followed close behind, her heels abandoned somewhere on the apartment floor, running in bare feet on the cold concrete of the hallway. They hit the stairwell and descended in the dark, Marcus navigating by feel, his left hand trailing the railing, his footsteps silent despite carrying a 47-pound child. The basement smelled like mildew and detergent. The laundry room was exactly where he said it would be, Dolores's ancient washing machines humming in the dark. The alley door had a deadbolt that required a key Marcus didn't have. He set Zoe down gently, told her to cover her ears, and kicked the door just below the lock. The frame splintered on the second kick, and the door swung open into cold night air. The alley was empty. Dumpsters, fire escapes, the ambient glow of streetlights filtering between buildings. Marcus picked Zoe back up, and they moved south, away from the shooter's position, until they reached the cross street where Peterson was already pulling up in the armored SUV. Peterson stepped out, a compact submachine gun held against his chest. His eyes swept the street, then locked on Victoria. Are you hit? No, minor cut. We need to move. Who's the shooter? Cerberus, Marcus said, moving past Peterson and opening the rear door. He placed Zoe inside, buckling her seatbelt with hands that were somehow still steady. One sniper, probably a 2-man team, shooter and spotter. They'll reposition once they realize we've left the building. We have maybe 6 minutes before they pick up our trail. Peterson looked at Marcus, then at Victoria, then back at Marcus. And you are? He's with us, Victoria said, climbing into the vehicle. Drive. Peterson drove. Marcus sat in the back with Zoe on his lap, his arms wrapped around her, the cig tucked between his thigh and the seat. Victoria sat across from them, pressing the handkerchief against the cut on her palm. Nobody spoke for the first 5 minutes. The only sound was the engine and Zoe's breathing slowly returning to normal as the warmth of the vehicle and the rhythm of the road pulled her towards something like calm. Daddy, she whispered. Yeah, baby. Why did the window break? Marcus closed his eyes. He'd rehearsed this conversation 1,000 times in his head, knowing it would come eventually, dreading it with every cell in his body. He'd imagined sitting her down somewhere quiet, finding the right words, explaining in a way a 7-year-old could understand, that her father used to be someone else, that there were people in the world who might try to find him, that sometimes they would have to move, and it wasn't her fault, and she hadn't done anything wrong. He never imagined having the conversation in the back of an armored SUV with blood on his shirt and a loaded weapon pressed against his leg. Some bad people found us, he said, but they're not going to find us again, I promise. Are you going to make them stop? The question hit him like a fist, not because of what she asked, but because of how she asked it. Not scared, not pleading. Matter of fact, like she already understood at 7 years old, that her father was the kind of man who could make bad people stop. Yeah, Zoe, I'm going to make them stop. She nodded and pressed her face back into his chest, and within 2 minutes she was asleep. Children's bodies had a way of shutting down when the world became too much, a survival mechanism Marcus envied more than anything. Victoria watched the exchange in silence. When Zoe was asleep, she spoke quietly. The safe house is in Connecticut. 30-acre property, gated, private security. It's registered under a shell corporation that has no connection to Nexus or my name. She'll be safe there. Who's going to be with her? A 4-person security team, all vetted. I'll have Mrs. Patterson brought up as well, if you want a familiar face for... How do you know about Mrs. Patterson? Victoria didn't flinch. I told you. We ran a thorough background check. Marcus's jaw tightened. You investigated the people in my life. I investigated everything, Marcus, because I needed to understand who saved my life, and because I knew Cerberus would be doing the same thing. Every piece of information I found, they'll find too. Mrs. Patterson, Zoe's school, your routines. I got there first, but not by much. The anger flared in his chest, hot and sharp. She had torn through the paper-thin walls of his anonymity, cataloged his daughter's life like data points in a spreadsheet. But underneath the anger was something worse, the knowledge that she was right. If Victoria's people could find Mrs. Patterson, Cerberus could too. The old woman who watched his daughter, who put broccoli in her mac and cheese, who sang her to sleep when Marcus worked late. She was a thread, and threads could be pulled. I want her moved tonight, Marcus said. Mrs. Patterson, tell her there's a gas leak in the building. Tell her anything. But get her out before Cerberus connects her to me. Already done. Peterson arranged it an hour ago. Marcus looked at her. An hour ago? You moved her before you even came to my apartment? I anticipated you'd need convincing, and I wasn't going to let an innocent woman die while you made up your mind. Something shifted between them in that moment. Not trust. Marcus didn't trust anyone, but a grudging respect. Victoria Ashford wasn't just wealthy, she was strategic. She thought 3 moves ahead and executed without hesitation. In another life, she would have made a hell of a field commander. The safe house was everything Victoria had promised. Set back from the road behind a wall of old-growth trees, a converted farmhouse that looked ordinary from outside, but had been retrofitted with reinforced doors, bulletproof glass, and a security system that would have made the Pentagon jealous. Peterson's team was already in place when they arrived. 4 men and 1 woman, all armed, all carrying themselves with the quiet competence of professionals. Marcus carried Zoe inside and laid her on a bed in one of the upstairs rooms. He pulled the blanket up to her chin, set Captain the Bear beside her pillow, and sat on the edge of the mattress. She didn't stir. Her face was peaceful, unmarked by the violence that had erupted around her. He stared at her for a long time, memorizing the curve of her cheek, the way her lashes rested against her skin, the small scar on her forehead from the time she'd fallen off the monkey bars at the park in Queens. He leaned down and kissed her forehead. "I'll be back," he whispered. "I promise." He found Victoria downstairs in the kitchen, sitting at a farmhouse table with a laptop open in front of her. Peterson stood by the door, arms crossed. They both looked up when Marcus entered. "She's asleep," Marcus said. He pulled out a chair and sat across from Victoria. "Tell me everything about Cerberus. Everything." Victoria turned the laptop to face him. Cerberus Defense, founded 12 years ago by a man named Alexander Volkov, Russian-born, naturalized British citizen, former SVR intelligence before going private. On paper, Cerberus is a defense contractor. Cybersecurity, drone technology, surveillance systems. In reality, they're a private army that sells to the highest bidder, regardless of flag or ideology. And they wanted your AI platform. Project Titan. Next-generation autonomous weapons AI. It can control drone swarms, coordinate battlefield logistics, and process tactical data faster than any human command structure. Whoever owns Titan owns the next generation of warfare. We built it for the Pentagon, but Cerberus has been trying to acquire it for over a year. Corporate espionage, hacking attempts, bribes, nothing worked. So they decided to take the shortcut. Kidnap the CEO. Titan's encryption is bio-integrated. It's keyed to my biometric data, retinal scan, voice print, Neural pattern. They can't access it without me. So yes, kidnapping the CEO was the play. Marcus processed this. The 5 men at the restaurant, they were Cerberus operators. Contracted through a cutout, but yes. And the leader, the one you put down, his name is Viktor Reznikov, former FSB. He has a reputation in that world. He doesn't fail, and he doesn't forgive. He's in custody. He is, but Cerberus has resources that make bail look like loose change. He'll be out within weeks, if not days, and when he gets out, he's going to come looking for the man who broke his jaw with a champagne bottle. Marcus leaned back in his chair. The kitchen was quiet. Through the ceiling, he could faintly hear Zoe's breathing on the baby monitor Peterson had set up. In, out. In, out. "What's Volkov like?" Marcus asked. Peterson answered this one. "Cold, patient, methodical. He doesn't make emotional decisions. The sniper tonight wasn't revenge. It was house cleaning. You're a variable he didn't account for, and Volkov eliminates variables. He sent a sniper after a 7-year-old girl. He sent a sniper after you. Zoe's existence is leverage to him. If he'd wanted her dead, she'd be dead. The shot was aimed at you, Marcus. They wanted to remove the threat, and then take Victoria at their leisure. And when removing me didn't work? Then they'll escalate. More operators, heavier equipment. Volkov has the money and the manpower to keep coming until the job is done." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. He looked at Victoria. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" Victoria met his gaze. She didn't look away, didn't soften, didn't try to dress it up. "I'm asking you to do what you were trained to do. Help me dismantle Cerberus's operation before they come at us again. I have the resources. I have the intelligence. What I don't have is someone who can operate in the spaces where my security teams can't go. You want me to be your weapon. I want you to be my partner. There's a difference." "Is there?" Victoria leaned forward. "I know what you think of me. Rich woman sitting in a tower, moving people around like chess pieces. And maybe that's part of who I am. But I didn't build Nexus by being stupid, and I didn't survive that restaurant by being lucky. I survived because you chose to act when nobody else did. I'm choosing to act now. The only question is whether you're going to act with me or sit in this house and wait for them to find a way past my security team." Marcus looked at the monitor. Zoe's breathing, steady, slow. The sound of his daughter sleeping peacefully because, for right now, she was behind walls thick enough to stop what was coming. But walls don't last forever. He knew that better than anyone. 7 years ago, Marcus said slowly, I was part of a unit that didn't exist. We went places nobody else could go. Did things nobody else would do. And then someone inside our own chain of command sold us out. I watched 5 of my brothers die in a place the government swore was safe. I carried my best friend's body for 3 miles through the desert before I accepted he was dead. And when I got home, when I tried to get answers, they erased me, burned my records, told me I never existed, told me my unit never existed, told me the men I'd buried never existed. Victoria was motionless. Peterson had looked away. I walked away from all of it, Marcus continued. I buried the wraith so deep I thought he was gone. I built a life for my daughter, a small life, a quiet life. And tonight someone shot through my window while she was watching cartoons. His voice hadn't risen. It hadn't cracked. It was level and steady, and that was what made it so terrifying. I'm not doing this for you, he said. I'm not doing this for Nexus or Project Titan or the future of warfare or whatever the hell your board of directors cares about. I'm doing this because a man named Alexander Volkov put a bullet through my daughter's window. and I'm going to make sure he never has the chance to do it again." Victoria nodded. "Then we have an agreement. We have an understanding. Not the same thing." "Fair enough." Marcus stood up from the table. "I need everything you have on Cerberus. Personnel files, facility locations, financial records, communication intercepts. Everything. And I need it by morning." "You'll have it tonight," Victoria said. "One more thing." Marcus paused at the kitchen doorway. "When this is over, when Volkov is done and my daughter is safe, I disappear again. You forget my name. You forget my face. You forget Zoe exists. That's the price." Victoria studied him for a long time. Then she nodded once. "Deal." Marcus climbed the stairs to Zoe's room. He checked the windows. Sealed. Bulletproof. He checked the monitor, the door locks, the sightlines from the hallway. Then he pulled the chair from the desk to the side of her bed and sat down. He placed the Sig Sauer on the bedside table within arm's reach. Then he picked up Captain the Bear, which had tumbled to the floor, and tucked it back under Zoe's arm. She stirred. Her eyes opened halfway, unfocused and heavy with sleep. "Daddy?" "I'm here." "Are the bad people gone?" "Not yet, baby, but they will be." "Promise?" He brushed a strand of hair from her face. His hand, the same hand that had broken a man's jaw 6 hours ago, was gentle enough to not wake her fully. "I promise." She closed her eyes. Her breathing slowed. Her grip on Captain loosened as sleep reclaimed her. Marcus sat in the dark, the gun on the table, his daughter breathing beside him, and began to plan. Somewhere in the back of his mind, the wraith stirred, not with rage, not with bloodlust, but with something far more dangerous. Purpose. For 7 years he'd been running from what he was. Tonight, he would stop running. Not because he wanted to fight, not because the violence called to him, but because a 47-pound girl who cut her sandwiches into triangles and named her stuffed bear Captain was sleeping 3 feet away from him, and there was nothing on this earth, no corporation, no army, no shadow organization, that he would allow to threaten her again. He reached for the laptop Victoria had left on the desk and opened it. The files were already loaded. Cerberus Defense, Personnel, Assets, Operations. Thousands of pages of intelligence gathered by a billion-dollar corporation's best analysts. Marcus began to read. Downstairs, Victoria sat alone at the kitchen table. Peterson had gone to coordinate the security perimeter. The house was quiet. She looked at her hands. The cut on her palm had stopped bleeding, but it would scar. She'd have a permanent reminder of this night etched into her skin. She thought about what Marcus had said, about watching his brothers die, about carrying his best friend through the desert, about being erased by the country he'd served. She thought about the way he held his daughter, the way his voice changed when he spoke to her. Softer, warmer, stripped of every defense. That voice was the real Marcus Cole. Everything else, the fighter, the ghost, the wraith, was armor built to protect the man who used that voice. Victoria Ashford had spent her entire career understanding leverage, understanding what made people act, what made them comply, what made them fight. She had built a technology empire by reading people better than they read themselves. But she had never met anyone like Marcus Cole, a man whose only leverage was a 7-year-old girl and a stuffed bear. A man who had nothing and would burn the world down to keep it. She closed her laptop and stared at the dark window. Her reflection stared back. Bruised, cut, barefoot, nothing like the woman who had walked into the ivory room 8 hours ago, expecting a quiet dinner. That woman was gone. Whatever came next would require someone else entirely. She just hoped she was strong enough to be that person. Upstairs, Marcus finished the first file and opened the second. The Wraith was awake now, fully awake, processing data the way it processed a battlefield. Coldly, efficiently, without mercy. Targets were identified. Vulnerabilities were mapped. A plan was forming, not in broad strokes, but in specific surgical detail. Alexander Volkov had made the same mistake every powerful man makes. He had looked at Marcus Cole and seen a waiter, a single father, a nobody. He was about to learn what that nobody could do. Marcus didn't sleep that night. He read every file Victoria's team had compiled on Cerberus defense. Personnel rosters, facility blueprints, financial transactions, intercepted communications. By 4 a.m., he had consumed over 2,000 pages of intelligence, and the outline of a plan had crystallized in his mind, with the clarity of a rifle scope locking onto a target. Cerberus operated out of 3 main locations. A corporate headquarters in London that was essentially a front, glass and marble and PR people in expensive suits. A training compound in Montenegro that handled the paramilitary side. And the real nerve center, a private estate outside of Geneva, Switzerland, where Alexander Volkov ran his operation behind walls of money and diplomatic immunity. But the weak point wasn't in Geneva. It was in New York. Viktor Reznikov was being held at the Metropolitan Correctional Center, awaiting arraignment. Victoria's legal team had been tracking the case. Cerberus had hired a top defense firm and was pushing for bail. Given the charges, assault, attempted kidnapping, weapons possession, a judge would likely set bail within the week. High, but not high enough to keep a man backed by Volkov's money behind bars. Marcus came downstairs at 5 in the morning. Victoria was already at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee in front of her, dark circles under her eyes. She hadn't slept either. "Victor is the key," Marcus said, sitting across from her. No greeting, no preamble. Volkov won't stop sending teams as long as he thinks the operation is still viable. We need to make it not viable. We need to make the cost of coming after you higher than the value of what he's trying to steal. How? Victor knows everything. He's Volkov's field commander. He knows the communication protocols, the extraction routes, the backup plans. If Victor talks, really talks, it gives us enough to expose Cerberus's entire covert operation to the DOJ, Interpol, and every intelligence agency that's been looking for a reason to shut Volkov down. Victor won't talk. He's ex-FSB. Those men are trained to resist interrogation for weeks. He won't talk to interrogators. He'll talk to me. Victoria set her coffee down. You want to get into a federal detention facility and have a private conversation with the man whose jaw you broke? Yes. That's impossible. You have contracts with the Department of Defense. You have relationships with federal prosecutors. You have the kind of money that makes impossible things merely inconvenient. Get me into a room with him. 30 minutes. That's all I need. Victoria studied him. And if he still won't talk? He'll talk. How can you be sure? Marcus leaned forward. Because I'm not going to threaten him. I'm going to offer him something he wants more than loyalty to Volkov. What's that? His life. Volkov doesn't tolerate failure. Victor knows what happens to operators who get captured. The moment Cerberus posts his bail, Victor isn't walking free. He's walking into a grave. Volkov will have him killed before he can be leveraged by any government agency. Victor knows this. He's sitting in that cell right now doing the math and realizing the numbers don't add up to survival. Victoria was quiet for a moment. Then she picked up her phone. I'll make the calls. It took 2 days. 2 days of legal maneuvering, favors called in, and what Marcus suspected was a significant financial contribution to someone's re-election campaign. But on Thursday morning, Marcus Cole walked through the doors of the Metropolitan Correctional Center with a visitor's badge and a federal prosecutor's authorization for a material witness consultation. Viktor Reznikov looked worse than Marcus expected. His jaw had been wired shut. Both eyes were bruised purple and yellow. He sat behind the table in the interview room with his wrists cuffed to a steel bar, wearing an orange jumpsuit that made his pale skin look almost translucent. When Marcus walked in, Victor's eyes, those colorless, predatory eyes, went wide. Then narrow. Then something Marcus hadn't expected appeared in them. Fear. Marcus sat down across from him. The guard closed the door. They were alone. "I'd ask how you're feeling," Marcus said, "but I already know the answer." Victor stared at him. When he spoke, the words came out mangled through the wired jaw, but intelligible. "You. The waiter." "Not anymore." "Who are you?" "Nobody. That's the point. I'm the man Volkov didn't see coming, and that should tell you everything you need to know about how well Volkov plans for contingencies." Victor said nothing. His cuffed hands were still on the table. "Let me tell you what's going to happen," Marcus continued, his voice conversational. "Your employer is going to post your bail, probably within the next 72 hours. You'll walk out of here thinking you're a free man. You'll get into a car that Cerberus sends for you, and somewhere between this building and wherever they're taking you, that car is going to make an unscheduled stop, and you are never going to be seen again." Victor's jaw muscles tightened behind the wires. He didn't argue. He didn't deny it. Because he knew. "Volkov doesn't keep broken tools," Marcus said. "You were his best field commander, and you got taken down by a busboy with a champagne bottle, in front of 40 witnesses, on camera. Your face is on every news channel in the country. You're toxic to him now. You're a liability. And we both know what Volkov does with liabilities." "What do you want?" Victor's voice was a rasp, barely human through the damaged jaw. "I want Cerberus. I want the operation. Communication networks, backup teams, the next move Volkov has planned. I want names, locations, and timelines. Everything." "And what do I get?" "You get to live. Federal protection, new identity, witness security program. The prosecutor I came in with has the paperwork ready. You sign, you talk, and you disappear. Not into a shallow grave in New Jersey, but into a life where Volkov can't reach you." Victor laughed. It was an ugly sound, half choked by the wires in his jaw. "You think witness protection can hide me from Volkov?" "I think witness protection plus Victoria Ashford's resources can hide anyone from anyone. And I think you're smart enough to know that the alternative is a car ride you don't come back from." Silence. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Victor stared at the table, his cuffed hands slowly opening and closing. Marcus watched him and recognized the calculation happening behind those pale eyes. It was the same calculation every soldier makes when the mission goes sideways. Adapt or die. "There's a server farm," Victor said finally. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Outside Geneva. It's where Volkov keeps everything. Client lists, operation files, financial records. Every dirty deal Cerberus has ever made. It's the crown jewels. You get that data, Volkov is finished. Not just exposed, destroyed. Every government he's sold weapons to, every dictator he's armed, every assassination he's ordered. It's all there. Security? 12-man team, armed. plus electronic countermeasures that would take a government agency 6 months to crack. But there's a window. Every quarter, Volkov does an in-person audit of the servers. He doesn't trust digital access, paranoid about hacking. He flies in, physically connects to the system, verifies the data, and flies out. The next audit is in 9 days. So Volkov will be physically present at the facility for approximately 4 hours. It's the one time the digital and physical security overlap, and the human element introduces vulnerabilities, shift changes, attention divided between the servers and Volkov's personal protection. Marcus leaned back. 9 days. It wasn't much time to plan an infiltration of a fortified facility in a foreign country, but it was enough. What else? Victor talked for 2 hours. He gave up everything: communication frequencies, security rotations, the names of Cerberus operators still in the field, the backup plan Volkov had for acquiring Victoria if the first attempt failed. By the time Marcus stood up from that table, he had enough intelligence to dismantle Cerberus from the inside out. At the door, he paused. One more thing. The sniper in Brooklyn. The one who shot through my apartment window. My daughter was in that room. Victor's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. That wasn't my order. I was already in custody. That was Volkov. Direct authorization. I know. I just wanted to hear you say it. Marcus walked out and didn't look back. The next 8 days were a blur of preparation. Victoria converted the Connecticut safe house into a command center. Peterson, once he understood the scope of what Marcus was planning, dropped his skepticism and threw himself into the logistics with the efficiency of the MI6 officer he'd once been. Marcus trained, not in any gym, in the woods behind the safe house, running the trails at 5 a.m., doing pull-ups on tree branches, drilling hand-to-hand combinations against shadows, until his muscles remembered what his mind had tried to forget. The rust fell away faster than he expected. The body remembers what the heart tries to bury. Every evening he stopped, no matter what. At 6 o'clock he walked upstairs, sat with Zoe, and helped her with her homework. Mrs. Patterson, now safely installed in a guest room at the safe house, had taken over Zoe's homeschooling, with the fierce determination of a woman who had raised 4 children of her own and wasn't about to let a little thing like a shadow war disrupt a 7-year-old's education.
"Daddy, what's 7 times 8? Zoe asked on the 5th evening, her pencil hovering over the worksheet.
What do you think it is?
56?
See, you didn't need me. She grinned. Then the grin faded.
Daddy, are you going somewhere?
He'd been careful. He hadn't discussed the operation in front of her, hadn't let her see the weapons or the tactical maps spread across the kitchen table. But children sense things. They feel the weight in a room even when they can't name it. I have to go on a trip, he said, just for a couple of days.
For work?
Yeah, for work.
Is it dangerous?
He could have lied. He almost did. But Zoe had her mother's eyes, and those eyes could see through anything. A little bit, he said. But I'm going to be very careful, and when I come back, this is all going to be over. No more moving, no more new schools. We're going to find a place and stay there. For good.
Promise?
Promise.
Can I pick the place?
He smiled. Yeah, Zoe, you can pick the place. I want to live near the beach, and I want a dog. A dog, huh? A big one, like a golden retriever, and I'm going to name him Captain, like my bear. That sounds perfect. She went back to her homework. Marcus watched her for a moment, memorizing the way she chewed her pencil when she was thinking, the way her eyebrows scrunched together on the hard problems. He carried those images with him when he went back downstairs to the maps and the weapons and the war. On the 9th day, Marcus boarded a private jet that Victoria had arranged through 3 layers of shell companies. Peterson was with him, along with a 4-man team of private operators that Victoria had hired from a firm with no ties to any government. They were expensive, discreet, and very good at their jobs. The flight to Geneva took 7 hours. Marcus spent it in silence, reviewing the facility layout Victor had provided, running scenarios in his head, stress testing every variable. Peterson sat across from him, doing the same. "You know this might not work," Peterson said somewhere over the Atlantic. "It'll work." "And if Volkov isn't there? If Victor lied?" "Victor didn't lie. He's too scared of dying to lie." "And if the security is heavier than he described?" Marcus looked up from the blueprints. "Then we adapt. That's what we do." They landed at a private airfield outside Lausanne at 3 a.m. local time. 2 vehicles were waiting. They drove through the Swiss countryside in darkness, the roads winding through hills that were invisible against the black sky. The Cerberus facility was located on a private estate in the hills above Lake Geneva. From the outside, it looked like a wealthy man's country home. Stone walls, manicured grounds, a long gravel driveway lined with trees. The security was invisible, but omnipresent. Motion sensors, thermal cameras, 12 armed guards in rotating patrols. And inside, as Victor had promised, Alexander Volkov was conducting his quarterly audit. Marcus and the team took position in the tree line at 4 a.m. They waited. At 5:15, the patrol pattern shifted. 2 guards moved to the east perimeter for a shift change, creating a 60-second gap in coverage on the south wall. Victor had been right. "Go," Marcus whispered. They moved like water through a crack. Peterson and 2 operators handled the perimeter. Silent takedowns on the guards using tranquilizer rounds. Marcus and the remaining 2 went for the main building. They breached a service entrance that Victor had identified as a blind spot in the camera coverage. Inside, the building was quiet. Marble floors, dim lighting, the hum of server cooling systems somewhere below. Marcus moved through the hallways from memory. Victor's descriptions had been precise enough to navigate by. Down a staircase, through a reinforced door that Peterson's tech specialist bypassed in 40 seconds, and into the server room. Volkov was there, standing in front of a terminal, a laptop connected to the main server rack, his back to the door. He was shorter than Marcus expected, maybe 5'9", with silver hair and the compact build of a man who had kept himself fit into his 60s. He wore a simple dark suit, no jewelry, no ostentation. He looked like a banker, not a warlord. 2 bodyguards flanked him. They were fast. The first one had his weapon halfway up before Marcus put a tranquilizer round in his neck. The second managed to get a shot off. The bullet cracked past Marcus's ear and punched a hole in the server rack behind him, before Marcus closed the distance and drove him into the wall with enough force to crack the plaster. A knee to the stomach, an elbow to the base of the skull, and the man folded. Volkov didn't run. He didn't reach for a weapon. He turned slowly, looked at Marcus, and in his eyes there was not fear, but curiosity. The cold, analytical curiosity of a man who had been in the intelligence business for 40 years and thought he had seen everything. "You're the waiter," Volkov said. His English was flawless, barely accented. "Word travels fast. I make it my business to know who disrupts my operations. Marcus Cole, Unit Wraith, Operation Black Lantern. You're supposed to be dead." "I get that a lot." Volkov glanced at his unconscious bodyguards, then back at Marcus. "So, Victoria Ashford sent her pet ghost to rob me." "She didn't send me. I volunteered." And what exactly are you volunteering to do? Kill me? You could have done that from the doorway. I don't want to kill you. I want that. Marcus nodded toward the laptop connected to the server. Every file, every client, every operation. I'm going to take it. And then I'm going to give it to every law enforcement and intelligence agency that's been trying to build a case against you for the last decade. Volkov smiled. It was a thin, bloodless expression, like a paper cut. You think data will stop me? I have lawyers in 12 countries, judges on my payroll, politicians who owe me favors. Your evidence will spend years in courts while I continue to operate. Maybe. But here's what won't spend years in court. Marcus took a step closer. The names of every dictator, every warlord, every sanctioned government you've sold weapons to. The assassination contracts, the black site locations. When that hits the public record, and it will, because Victoria Ashford owns media platforms that reach 2 billion people, your clients will turn on you. Not because they're moral, but because you'll become a liability. And men like you taught me what happens to liabilities. The smile faded. For the first time, something cracked in Volkov's composure. Not fear, not yet, but the recognition that the man standing in front of him had thought this through, had planned not just the breach, but the aftermath, had understood that destroying Cerberus wasn't about a single raid. It was about making the ecosystem that sustained it collapse. You're making an enemy you cannot afford, Volkov said quietly. You shot through my daughter's window, Marcus replied. His voice didn't rise. It dropped. You sent a sniper to kill me while my 7-year-old was watching cartoons 3 feet away. You made an enemy you cannot comprehend. He pulled the laptop from the terminal. The download was already complete. Peterson's tech specialist had been running a mirror copy since they entered the room. Marcus disconnected the device and handed it to the operator behind him. We're done here, Marcus said. He turned his back on Alexander Volkov and walked out. It was the most deliberate insult he could deliver. Turning your back on a man like that, showing him he wasn't even worth watching. He heard Volkov's breathing change behind him, heard the sharp intake of a man swallowing rage, but no movement followed. Volkov was many things, but he wasn't stupid enough to attack a man who had just dismantled his security with the efficiency of someone pulling weeds. They were off the estate in 4 minutes, in the vehicles in 6, at the airfield in 30, airborne in 45. Marcus sat in the back of the jet with a laptop on his knees. Peterson was on a satellite phone, coordinating with Victoria's legal team and a contact at the FBI's International Operations Division. The data transfer was happening in real time. Files streaming to secure servers maintained by Nexus Technologies. Copies being routed simultaneously to the Department of Justice, Interpol, MI6, and the Swiss Federal Police. By the time they landed back in the United States, Alexander Volkov's world was on fire. The first arrests came within hours. Cerberus operatives in London, Berlin, and Sao Paulo, picked up by local law enforcement acting on intelligence that had appeared as if from nowhere. Volkov's accounts in Switzerland, Luxembourg, and the Cayman Islands were frozen. His political allies, seeing the direction of the wind, began issuing statements of denial and distance with the practiced speed of people who had always known this day might come. Viktor Reznikov, true to his deal, was processed into witness protection that afternoon. He would testify before a federal grand jury in 3 months. His testimony, combined with the server data, would be the nail in the coffin. Cerberus defense was dead. It just didn't know it yet. Marcus arrived back at the Connecticut safe house at 11 o'clock at night. The security team met him at the gate. Peterson went inside to debrief with Victoria. Marcus went straight upstairs. Zoe was asleep. Mrs. Patterson was dozing in the chair beside the bed, a paperback open on her lap. She stirred when Marcus entered. "She waited up for you until 9:30, Mrs. Patterson whispered. "Made me promise to wake her when you got home." "Let her sleep. I'll be here when she wakes up." Mrs. Patterson patted his arm as she passed, the way she always did. A simple gesture that carried more warmth than Marcus had received from anyone in years. She closed the door softly behind her. Marcus sat on the edge of Zoe's bed. Captain the Bear had fallen to the floor again. He picked it up and set it on the pillow. "Daddy?" He looked down. Zoe's eyes were open, half-lidded with sleep, but clear. "Hey, baby girl. Go back to sleep." "Did you come back?" "I came back." "Is it over?" He looked at her. Her afro puffs were flattened on one side from the pillow. There was a smudge of marker on her cheek from the art project Mrs. Patterson had supervised that afternoon. She was holding Captain in one hand and reaching for Marcus with the other. He took her hand. It was so small in his. So small and so warm. "Yeah, Zoe, it's over. Can we go to the beach now?" He laughed. It came out rough and broken, more like a cough, because there was something in his throat that he couldn't swallow, and his eyes were burning in a way that had nothing to do with fatigue. He blinked and felt wetness on his cheeks, and for the first time in 7 years, Marcus Cole, the ghost, the wraith, the man who had been trained to feel nothing, let himself cry. "Yeah," he said, his voice thick. "We can go to the beach." Zoe smiled and closed her eyes, her hand still wrapped around his finger. He sat there for a long time after she fell asleep. The house was quiet. The monitor showed green across the board. Outside, the Connecticut woods were dark and still, and somewhere beyond them, the world was churning with the fallout of what he'd done. He didn't care about the world. He cared about this room, this bed, this girl. After a while, he heard footsteps on the stairs. Light, deliberate. Victoria appeared in the doorway, still in the clothes she'd been wearing all day, her face drawn with exhaustion, but her eyes alive. "It's done," she said softly, leaning against the frame. "DOJ is moving on Volkov. Interpol has issued a red notice. His own board is filing for dissolution of the company. Peterson estimates full operational collapse within 60 days. Marcus nodded, but didn't look up from Zoe's face. "Peterson also says you're the most effective operator he's ever worked with. He wanted me to offer you a permanent position. Head of security. 7 figures. Full benefits." "No." Victoria smiled. She'd expected that. "What will you do?" "Find a beach. Get a dog. Help my daughter with her math homework." "That's it?" "That's everything." Victoria was quiet for a moment. "Thank you, Marcus. For what you did at the restaurant. For what you did tonight. For all of it." He finally looked up at her. In the dim light of Zoe's room, with the shadows softening her face and the armor of her corporate persona stripped away, Victoria Ashford looked like what she was. A woman who had been terrified and saved and changed by both. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "We're even." "We're not even close to even, but I'll let you pretend." She straightened up. "I set up a trust for Zoe, for her education. It's already funded, and it's in her name. Before you say no, it's not charity. It's not payment. It's the only way I know how to say what I need to say, which is that what you did matters, and it should mean something for her future. You can be angry about it, but I'm not taking it back." Marcus looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked down at Zoe, her future. college. A life where she didn't have to worry about money, or hide from shadows, or sleep in apartments with broken radiators. A life where the only thing she had to figure out was what she wanted to be. "Okay," he said quietly. "For her." Victoria nodded. "Good night, Marcus." "Good night, Victoria." She turned and walked down the stairs. He heard her footsteps fade, heard the murmur of her voice as she spoke with Peterson, heard the front door close as she left for her own car and her own life. They would not see each other again. They both knew it, and they were both at peace with it. Marcus eased himself off the bed, careful not to wake Zoe. He moved to the window and looked out at the dark tree line. The night was clear. Stars were visible through the branches, something you never saw in the city. He thought about the men who had died in Somalia. Jackson, who taught him to play chess. Rivera, who could make anyone laugh. Thompson, who carried photos of his twin boys in his breast pocket. Okafor, who sang gospel hymns while cleaning his weapon. And Davis, Marcus's best friend, the man he'd carried through the desert, who had once told him, over bad coffee in a forward operating base, that the only mission that really mattered was the one waiting for you at home. He hadn't understood that then. He understood it now. Marcus Cole turned from the window. He checked the locks one final time. He set the Sig Sauer on the dresser, barrel pointed at the wall, and stared at it for a long moment. Then he opened the dresser drawer, placed the weapon inside, and closed it. He wouldn't need it anymore. He pulled the chair to Zoe's bedside, sat down, and closed his eyes. For the first time in 7 years, sleep came easily. Not the shallow, alert half-rest of a man waiting for the next threat. Real sleep. Deep and dreamless and safe. Because the war was over. The ghosts were quiet. And in the morning, his daughter would wake up, and she would ask about the beach, and he would say yes, and they would go. Together. Into a life that was small and ordinary and worth every scar he carried to protect it. Marcus Cole was no longer a ghost. He was no longer a weapon. He was no longer the Wraith. He was a father, and that was the most dangerous thing he had ever been, and the only thing that ever mattered.